The most frequently asked question is about selecting pigments for a specific client. As a result, they are based on different bases. What is a pigment base? Chromium oxide, green, a mineral which actually acts as a neutralizer. They give off an olive tone because they contain a lot of yellow, as they are based on yellow. This pigment, like all other minerals, is quite pastel. And let's analyze our main, first, so-called basic line. We were eagerly waiting for the microblading pigments to finally hit the market. They are essentially made based on our mineral pigments. For diversifying your work, this line called Pulse is a bit more neutral, not as warm as the pigments for hair stroke technique and hyper-realism. Milk chocolate. You could say this is a bestseller. The main combinations of shades, ingredients. We have a gorgeous, colorful and very clear guide on all these pigments, which I will talk about today. When some artists refer to such pigments as green-based pigments, I believe that's not quite correct. At the very least, because it scares the artists. And when we work with this pigment on eyebrows, it's an incredibly beautiful shade, very often used by me, and it can also be used in its pure form. Hello everyone, I'm Olga Hanafy, and today we are talking about the coloristics of pigments for eyebrows and eyelids. We have several lines for eyebrows and eyelids. All of them differ from each other in some way. They are needed for different purposes, and I will tell you about them in great detail. Before we begin, I would like to ask you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also leave comments, because we always monitor them closely and always respond. If you are interested in something, please write to us. I would also like to mention that we have a wonderful, colorful and very clear guide on all these pigments that I will talk about today. And therefore, if you are interested, you can find the link to it in the description of this video. I think you all know that we have a very large chat on Telegram dedicated to pigments in Hanafy color speeds, where professionals exchange opinions, experiences, ask questions, and can share the results of their work. So I must say that the most frequently asked question is about selecting pigments for a specific client. Most of the questions, of course, concern eyebrow pigments. Therefore, I think that today's video will be useful to the absolute majority of professionals. All pigments are different. They have different combinations of main ingredient components, and as a result, they are based on different bases. What are pigment bases? What types are there? And how can they be distinguished? I believe that eyebrow pigments, Olga, are divided by bases into pigments on a yellow base, pigments on an orange base, and pigments on a red base. Many mistakenly think that if a pigment is on a yellow base, it means that yellow is the most abundant in the pigment's composition. This is not always the case. Yellow may be more prevalent only in light shades. However, pigments are considered to be on a yellow base because there is so much yellow in them that when combined with black dye, it gives a cool tone. Olive shade and the small amount of red in the pigment composition prevents the pigment from becoming warm. When some artists refer to such pigments as pigments on a green base, I believe this is not entirely correct. At the very least, because it scares the artists. Eyebrows cannot, should not, and will never be green, even if your pigments appear olive when spread. They appear olive because they contain a lot of yellow, as they are based on yellow. And there is so little red that when combined with black, the yellow gives an olive undertone. Pigments on a red base can be explained in the same way. It is not necessarily the case that the red component is greater than everything else. It's just that there is so little yellow that when combined with black, the red gives an active burgundy undertone, which affects the overall state of the pigment. Of course, there must also be a yellow component, otherwise the pigment is not suitable for working with eyebrows. But the percentage of red and its combination with a large or small amount of black. Obviously, gives a red burgundy undertone. That's why we call such pigments red-based pigments. In those pigments where yellow and red are added in approximately equal amounts, and the influence of the black component is also approximately equal, we call such pigments orange-based because, as everyone knows, the combination of red and yellow gives an orange shade. And to understand which skin type a pigment is suitable for based on its base, please watch my video on color theory, where I explain this in great detail. Now we will go over our main first, so-called basic line with a blue label for eyebrows and eyelids. It includes 8 pigments. 5 of them are intended for eyebrows, but of course they can also be used for eyelids. And 3 pigments are only for eyes. They cannot be used on eyebrows because they contain a very large amount of carbon black, and this is not suitable for eyebrows at all. I will now show you how they look when dropped into water. I must say that this line with neutral and cool shades on a yellow base is more intended for European skin, for people with fair skin, light hair, and cool eye colors. To work successfully on other skin tones, darker ones, with different eyes, from other regions, from other parts of our planet, we have a fairly large number of other lines. We will definitely talk about them later. And we also have correctors that, when added even to this basic line, can also change the shade in the direction you need. So let's start with pigment number 1. It's called golden blonde. Please take a look at how light it is, how the yellowness is clearly visible. That is the yellow base. At the same time, when mixed with the black component, it gives a slight clinically olive undertone. That is a slight greenness. This is observed because these pigments have very little red component, and yellow, when mixed with black, gives such a shade. Intended for the lightest, true natural blondes with very pale, almost creamy skin with very light blue or light gray eyes. That is such. For such types, any slight darkening of the eyebrows will make it look very unnatural, harsh. And such women will look older. None of the girls or women want to look older than their age, and excessively dark, unsuitable dark eyebrows always add age. Pigment number 2, dark blonde. Its essence is the same as the first number, but it is a little darker because it contains a bit more black color, a bit more of the dark component. Accordingly, there will be even more olive tones in it. This sometimes scares beginners, less experienced artists, or those who are not very well versed in color theory. You should not be afraid of this olive tone. If you even take a pure olive tattoo pigment from the shelf labeled olive and use it, for example, to draw an eyeliner on the eyes, thinking you will create an olive eyeliner, if a client wants it, saying, "I want an olive eyeliner," or olive shading on the eyelids, you will never have her in your life. Green, olive, all of it will turn gray in the skin. Therefore, the olive tone indicates that there is little red component in the pigment, and the yellow component mixes with the black. And it gives this greenish olive effect, which should not scare you. It simply indicates that the pigment will not be too warm, indicating that the pigment is not suitable for melanin-rich skin. And these are such types as light brown, medium dark brown. It must be of a cool color, iris, eyes. So we drop this pigment, see how similar it is to number 1, but it looks somewhat darker. Another wonderful quality of dark blonde is that it can, in some cases, act as a corrector for working with pink, red, or orange residues on the eyebrows. We have special correctors for this purpose. However, if the color is not too intense, not too dense, not too bright, then number 2, dark blonde, is quite sufficient as a corrector to cover these pink and red residues. The next pigment is number 3, milk chocolate. It can be said that this is the best seller of this entire basic line with the blue label. It is in the middle of the eyebrow pigments. It is the warmest in the entire palette. It is excellent, both for independent use and as a constant participant. Some mixes with lighter, with darker pigments from this and from our other eyebrow lines as well. Perfectly suitable for, yes, eyebrows that require some warmth. As soon as there is a hint of warmth in the iris, light brown eyes, eyes of the so-called whiskey color, a little bit more golden tint in the hair of our blondes. If not, then already ash. In the hair, warmth already appears for light brunettes. In general, a very versatile pigment used as often as possible. And now we will see how it looks in water, how much visually warmer it is due to the fact that it contains a greater amount of red component. In terms of darkness, in terms of saturation, specifically in the sense of darkness, it is the same as number 2 dark blonde, but it is warmer. Please take a look. The next pigment is much darker. This is a pigment called dark brunette, a pigment in which the dark component is immediately visible. There is more of it. A pigment that is often used for brunettes and dark-haired individuals. The eyes should be more saturated. They don't necessarily have to be browny, and they can also be gray. But in any case, these are brighter types, darker types. And often, this pigment is also mixed with others. Well, most often, to be honest, specifically with number 3, with milk chocolate, in case it needs to be slightly lightened. And slightly warm it up. If you work with number 4 in its pure form, it heals to a neutral, cool, gray-brown. And I think that when clients ask for graphite, not understanding what it is, they just want some non-warm gray eyebrows, then this is exactly your option. Because taking just graphite gray color, as you know, it's not allowed on the eyebrows, they will heal. Excessively cool, and maybe even with a bluish tint. Here is a balanced composition that will give you that cool grayness that is so desirable for your clients. Let's see how it looks in water. You see how much darker it is. You see, compared to number 3, it is significantly cooler, but a very beautiful natural shade. The main thing is not to confuse which skin you are using it on. Number 5, the darkest in the brow range. Very similar to number 4, black-brown, but as you can see from the name itself, with a slightly greater black component. The pigment is also neutral, leaning towards cool. It has little red tint, very good for types that are called winter, contrasting types with very dark, almost black hair, with very dark, almost black eyes, and at the same time pale skin. Or the eyes should be a cool blue or deep, cool gray color without any warmth. In the skin of such clients, there is very little melanin, that is, they look cold. And for them, number 5 is just right. Look at how it resembles number 4, but is much more saturated. Of course, it can be used in mixes with other pigments. Naturally, due to its darkness, it is very good for working with eyes. Not only for some eyeliner and even shading, but also directly for the lash line. With this number, it can turn out quite bright and saturated. All these pigments are suitable for working with eyes. On the eyelids, because current trends in permanent makeup suggest that working on the eyelids is not just about the lash line, and not just about eyeliner. We create various shadings, low and wide, in which not only the darkest colors are indeed involved, we can add various lighter brown shades to give these shadings and shadows a more natural look. In the context of discussing this basic line, I will show you how it can be adjusted towards warmth. When you encounter skin with more melanin, when you need to achieve a warmer result after healing, and let's say you don't have access to our other lines on different bases. For this, we have correctors. Red-orange, corrector number 1, and yellow-orange. They, when added to our main line, will make it significantly warmer. Let's visually see how this looks. For example, we will take dark blonde, which obviously, as I already mentioned, looks a little olive. It always confuses beginners and tells them to be afraid. There's no need to fear this greenness. I am not exactly tired, but I keep saying and saying this constantly. For many years, and I just told you about it now as well. But if suddenly you need to warm it up, no, you have a hint of chocolate or, well, I don't know what other reasons there might be, you need to make it significantly warmer. Let's see how this is easily done in 1 second. I will now drop into the test tube, again number 2, and add corrector number 1, red-orange. For such a test tube, of course, I will add much less corrector. Usually in practice, we also add just a little bit of corrector. Very often people ask for a precise recipe, how many drops of this, how many drops of that. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you the exact number of drops in each case. It all depends on, it is selected, of course, individually. Well, let's say I will now add just 1 drop, and you will still see the difference. Here, of course, you will need to stir. That's it. Look at the warm shade we have achieved, and see how it has become strikingly different from the original. Let's look at the same thing again on cotton pads, because sometimes on different items, on different originals, you want to see how the pigment looks. Some find it more convenient in water, some prefer it on the hand, and others find it easier to make a swatch on paper with a cotton swab. There are many options. Here, for example, on a cotton pad, the same difference is very clearly visible. From light to dark, through warm to cooler tones. And here you can compare that number 2 dark blonde, into which I added 1 drop of corrector. For your convenience, we have created a special guide, a detailed story, like the one I just made for you, a detailed account of all eyebrow pigments from all lines and all eyelid pigments. You can get it via the link in the description, and you can refer to it to recall what I just told you, to double-check yourself, and this will help you in your work. And now let's continue analyzing this line, because we still need to look at numbers 6, 7, and 8, which are used exclusively for eyelids. Number 6, gray charcoal color, dark gray charcoal color. It's called charcoal. It's almost black, but not black. When can we use it? When a client wants a lash line or an eyeliner, but is very wary of black color, and you also see that their type to be continued, well, for such a type, you don't want to use too dark and bright shades. This color is softer, a bit lighter. Of course, very cool, since it contains a large amount of carbon black and very little yellow and red components. You must understand that even in such dark colors, which seem absolutely black, of course, there is additional shades of red and yellow in varying amounts. To balance this shade and steer it away from a radically black color, unadulterated, as they say, by anything. Such a color will be 100% bluish gray or even blue if used in its pure form. So a balanced grayish shade. Let's see how it looks in water in a test tube. When it enters the water, it will appear, obviously, almost black to us. However, when we compare it with these dark colors, you will certainly see the difference. Number 7, the darkest of all Hanafy pigments. We have nothing darker. It's called dye black, a truly deep black. I claim everywhere that it doesn't turn blue. Why do I say that? Because again, it's not a pure black color. A certain amount of yellow is added to it and a certain amount of red. Very small, very little, so that it doesn't lose its rich depth and blackness. However, it's not a pure black color. And this balancing with these shades is essentially equivalent to adding a corrector. We are often advised to add a corrector so that the black color doesn't turn bluish. Here, it's as if I've already added it for you. However, in order for the pigment to retain its true appearance, its true blackness, not to turn gray or bluish, it is essential to follow the rules of proper handling of this pigment. A very dense, deeply embedded pigment like this will still, after some time, not look black, but rather, overall, appear black-gray, black-blue, or blue-black, let's say. When can you use this color? When you do inter-eyelash, of course, for almost everyone. It is suitable for them. You can also draw eyeliner with this pigment. On the lash line, black color suits everyone very well. It's just that some don't want a very bright, dark shade, so we offer you a lighter shade. Number 6. Please look, the difference on the test tube is obvious. It is very clearly visible. Number 7. The black, of course, is richer, deeper, and blacker. And it's up to you to decide which of these colors you will use on the eyes. We also have pigment number 8. And I am pleased to talk about this pigment because, in my opinion, it is deservedly, unjustly overlooked, as if not everyone understands what it is. I would like to boast about it to you. I believe it is very successful and useful for many types. It's pleasant to work with. What is its peculiarity? It is the same black color as number 7, but it practically lacks the yellow component. That is, this pigment consists only of black and red. What happens when in this mixture of colors, black, red, and yellow, one of the colors is missing? We have analyzed this many times, and I have recorded various special videos about it. If you add red to black and do not add yellow, the shade becomes burgundy with a distinct red sheen. And how red will it be? How burgundy it will be, how dark it will be, all this will depend on the ratio of the black and red components. Here, as you understand, there is a very large amount of black, so this pigment will never look red on the skin. Sure, and of course, it will never give your eyes made with this pigment the effect of unhealthy, sickly red eyes. This pigment just slightly hints of a certain eggplant-like hue. And it is very, very suitable for green-eyed and especially brown-eyed clients. When you have warm brown eyes with a lot of melanin and they are sunny like amber, right? A little lighter, a little darker. On these eyes, over time, the black color, which eventually acquires some grayness, that is, it loses its depth and becomes more gray and cooler. So gray frames do not suit such eyes at all. It looks cheap and not stylish. And for such eyes, I recommend using this pigment because it doesn't have yellow into grayness. Such a pigment does not fade and will delight your client for a long time with a rich, beautiful shade. At the same time, it won't cause redness in the eyes either. A universal thing for clients with brown eyes. Now I will drop it into the water as well, and you will see the difference. Essentially, it is warmer because the absent yellow does not mix with black, preventing that cold olive green. The color of ripe dark eggplant is very clearly visible. Very interesting, very advantageous for many types of clients. And let's take another look at these pigments on cotton pads. 3 dark ones, all 3 for the eyelids, but I think if you look closely, the difference is obvious to you. I would like to specifically talk about the short range of organic correctors that are used to cover up unsuccessful permanent makeup or to adjust the color itself. That is, adding a corrector is possible directly into the cap with the main pigment you are working with. I want to reiterate that I cannot offer you any strict rules or ready-made formulas. Correctors are needed to help you at a certain point in your professional life. But nowhere will I ever tell you that. Add corrector number 1 to all pigments in the amount of 2 drops, or add this pigment there. There is no such thing. This is, unfortunately, or in my opinion, fortunately, that professionals must use correctors. Well, let's say, understanding why they are doing it. Correctors can be used both for an independent procedure for neutralization of a certain color. At the moment when we decide that there is a little old permanent makeup pigment in the client's skin, when removal is not necessary, and we can correct the situation with new permanent makeup. We only need to address the color issue. What color will we use to correct it? And then, in some situations, the primary procedure should involve using only a corrector. In order not to overload the skin with an excessive amount of pigment, after the procedure, with the corrector heals, the pigment settles into the skin, somehow changes. Neutralizes the primary color, you can look at the correction and then decide whether something else needs to be done, whether the color needs to be changed somehow, or if another brown shade should be used first. Second, as I already mentioned, you can modify your main pigment by adding a few drops of corrector into the cap with it. Next, actually, this is probably the most common use. You can also work with several pigments in one procedure, but layer by layer. Not mixing pigments in one cap, but for example, doing the first pass with a corrector and then with the main color. There are many options. The number of correctors used is also individual. What and when to use is up to you to decide. I can only give you advice. So, corrector number 1, the most bright, orange-red. Extremely warm, suitable for neutralizing cool tones, for warming up pigments that seem not warm enough to you. This corrector can be added to eyebrow pigments of any range, even the warmest ones. There are situations when the skin is so cool, so melanin-rich, that it absorbs all the warmth, even from a warm pigment. And to achieve a normal brown shade, you need to additionally add a very warm corrector. So don't be afraid to use it. How much to add is up to you to decide. Well, you just need to understand that, of course, it's a small amount, a small percentage of the total amount of pigment used. Pigment number, corrector number 2, yellow-orange. You see, it is much lighter, but also very, very warm. So it's a color like that of an orange, and it can also be used to warm up pigments as well as for coverage, but with the difference that this corrector will lighten your pigment more. If you need not only to warm up but also to lighten, this corrector is preferable. And of course, we remember the color wheel of Itten. Which shades are covered by which complementary colors we remember, and depending on the original shade, we can use one or the other corrector. They are often used together in a mix. You can use this corrector but not for covering permanent makeup, rather for neutralizing your own natural cool lip tones, especially if the lips have a distinct lilac purple undertone. Then, of course, a yellow-orange corrector can serve as a perfect base for the main color. Also, the third corrector is completely different in color and purpose. If these correctors are intended for us to warm up and to some extent lighten the pigments, then this pigment is neutralizing. Red residues. As you remember, on the color wheel opposite the red shade is green. And this greenish swampy olive corrector can effectively neutralize residual red, salmon, or some orange residues in the eyebrows. This often happens after microblading. In microblading, when it fades, often such raspberry red streaks remain. I believe it is quite active, saturated, and with a minimal amount of red because it is very olive, very greenish, so try to work with it specifically. That is preventively on some very active, bright red areas, because with a slight pink residue, as I have already mentioned, it can handle it perfectly. Similar to this corrector. Pigment, dark blonde. It is much warmer. It has more red, a red component, and it heals to a good light brown color. But therefore, it cannot be considered a full-fledged corrector. It is a normal pigment for eyebrows. But in some cases, it also does a good job of neutralizing pink and red shades on the eyebrows. But only, of course, they must be very light and shadow-like, not dense at all. Corrector. Number 3 is for more complex cases, which for some reason you decided not to remove. Let's drop the correctors into the water and take a look as well. Well, in principle, there are bright shades here. You'll see for yourself, but let's drop it anyway. As you can see, the corrector palette, it's very short, only 3 shades. Many ask why. We have, a circle, it's, very large, and there are many different shades. And for each, there should be its complementary one, which will neutralize and help correct it. But the fact is, when we work with permanent makeup, the variety of these shades that need correction is very limited. We usually don't have an endless rainbow of colors on our face. We work with specific cases, such as cooling of the eyebrows, with some grayer or bluish shades, and occasionally some blues that require. If we are not talking about removal, then we work with orange. We never use any radical green colors, emerald colors, grass colors, and so on. Still, in our shades, there must be the correct combination of the 3 necessary components to create a brown shade. These are black, red, and yellow. And in the olive corrector, there is also black, red, and yellow. It's just that the concentration and combination of them is such that in the end we see a rather greenish olive shade. Do not use radical colors for eyebrow correction. Never use pure green. Firstly, it's not necessary. We do not have such redness that requires neutralization with an emerald shade. And then how it will behave in the skin and what kind of sandwich you will end up with, only God knows. I would not recommend it to you. And let me finally show you the difference between dark blonde, which is the color that is our most ashy blonde and can also serve as a kind of corrector. For this redness, look, they really are similar. I don't know if it will be visible on the screen, but this one is still more green. And here, obviously, to my eye, at least from here, there is a greater presence of the red component. Here, it is much less. Here, the main components are black mixed with yellow. There is just a tiny bit of red here. Otherwise, their essence is the same. The next product lines I would like to discuss and tell you about are the lines for the hair stroke technique. We have 2 such lines, and I will talk about both of them right away to show them in comparison and explain how they differ from each other. The first line is our own Hanafy line, initially containing 3 pigments: light, medium, and dark for the hair stroke technique. I want to immediately clarify. When we write on the label that this is a series for the hair stroke technique, it does not mean that these pigments cannot be used for eyebrows in the soft shading technique or shading on the eyelids. Of course, all of this is suitable for these techniques as well, since the pigment compositions are identical. They are always identical, consisting of 3 main colors: black, red, and yellow. The compositions are absolutely the same. These yellow, red, and black are always the same. Sometimes a small amount of dioxide is added to the pigments, titanium. The ratio of these ingredients varies. As a result, there are different colors, different saturation, different warmth. They can be used for any techniques. However, why is it still written on them? Hair strokes. Firstly, because they contain a small amount of titanium dioxide, which adds density to the pigment. When we draw a line, we would like it to be less transparent, unlike shading. We would like some greater clarity, visibility of this line. That is why titanium dioxide has such a density. It gives us, actually, titanium dioxide is also present in small amounts in our main line. Therefore, if desired, you can certainly create hair strokes with the main line as well. There is no titanium dioxide at all, as I have already told you, in Olga Kostinetskaya's line. And naturally, you can also use Olga Kostinetskaya's line for hair stroke technique. However, you should understand that the stroke will be less saturated, less dense, and more transparent. What else characterizes the line for hair stroke technique? The fact that it is warm. That is, when we do the hair stroke technique, we initially understand that the line is a denser arrangement of pixels, unlike the shading technique. And when we create such a dense line, in the end, as it heals in the skin, it usually looks cooler than eyebrows done with the same pigment in the shading technique. This is a law of physics, a law of physiology, of skin anatomy. There's nothing that can be done about it. Therefore, as a rule, masters who know this, add a corrector to the pigment to make it initially warmer, and it will heal to the correct necessary brown light or ash blonde color, whatever is needed. Therefore, knowing these laws and these features, and knowing how experienced masters solve this problem, we have solved this problem for everyone else right away. That is, these pigments are like pigments from our main line with an orange corrector already added. In other words, the pigments stop being on a yellow base and become pigments on an orange base. They are initially warmer, and this helps achieve the desired color without the additional use of a corrector. The line for the hair stroke technique, consisting of 4 pigments, it is called hyperrealism and bears the name of the master from the United Kingdom with whom we collaborated, Miriam Mekanova. Of course, we need to explain how these 2 lines differ and why we came up with all of this. Well, first of all, Miriam herself specializes in working specifically in this technique. So according to her understanding of the work's features, her understanding of coloristic tasks, she asked me to assist in creating this line. Naturally, these pigments are also warm. They are also based on orange. The difference is that, well, first of all, there are 4 of them, which means, accordingly, a variety of shades. A bit more. These pigments contain a slightly higher amount of titanium dioxide, meaning they settle into the skin somewhat more densely. And also, subtitle editor A. Semkin, proofreader AE. The difference between these numbers is smoother. That is, it's like a kind of gradient. A smooth gradient from light to dark color, from a very light, warm brown shade to a rich, dark brown, but also warm. In fact, you could say that these 2 lines complement each other, and you can work with all of them using this technique. And mix them together, achieving even more variety of shades. Our profession is creative, so no one can forbid you from doing this. Now we will see how these pigments look in test tubes with water and how they visually differ from each other. So now we will add some water. All 3 pigments are from the main hair strokes line. The lightest one is like a pleasant light. The warm shade is slightly more saturated medium. I think its warmth and orangeness are visible here to an even greater extent. and the darkest is dark, a beautiful dark brown, yet very warm shade. These pleasant warm shades are suitable for any techniques working on eyebrows and eyelids. Now we will add 4 pigments from the line Hyperrealism. Let's see how they differ, how beautifully they look next to each other, and then we'll compare the vials of these pigments with the vials from our main line for the hair stroke technique. You can already see that there is a difference between the first and second numbers, but it's not as big as it was last time. That is a smoother gradient, a smoother transition from light to dark. And finally, the darkest one. Very beautiful. Here, take a look, 2 palettes. The main hair stroke and the Hyperrealism line. Well, they are of course similar, but everything I have already mentioned is very obvious here. A smoother transition, a smoother gradient in this line. Slightly more pastel shades, they are softer due to a slightly higher content. Titanium dioxide of white color, use it. Work with pleasure. Now we will talk about the line named after my colleague, my friend, the remarkable, talented, wonderful, and intelligent master, Olga Kostinetskaya. We created this line, together with her specifically, initially intending for it to help masters learn to create beautiful shading on eyelids, for which Olga Kostinetskaya is so famous. In order to achieve a brown shading on the eyelid skin, the pigment must be ultra-warm. The pigment must neutralize melanin, which is found in the eyelid in greater quantities than in the rest of the skin, of the face. We take into account the thinness of this skin, the delicacy of this skin. Taking all these features into account, the pigments we created, as I already mentioned, are very warm, with a significant addition of the red component. And we call this line red-based. The pigment has a reddish halo, when shades of brown that appear after healing in the skin are incredibly beautiful and have a warm hue. With proper application, they never turn gray. This was a very deliberate, very well thought out process. After we created these 4 pigments for eyelids, we knew it and before, but then we practically confirmed that these pigments are excellent for eyebrows too. Therefore, the line was named Eyes and Brows by Olga Kostinetskaya. You can successfully use these pigments both on eyes and eyebrows, which is what sets this line apart. Besides being based on a different color base, they are warmer and perform better on melanin-rich skin. It can also be said that this is the only line in the palette. Hanafy is completely and entirely organic, while the rest of our eyebrow lines are organic. However, according to the rules, they should be considered hybrid, because they contain a small amount of dioxide, titanium. Titanium dioxide is a mineral pigment, therefore. To be fair, such pigments should be called hybrid. Although, of course, you understand that there is very little titanium dioxide in brow pigments. But still, here there is none at all. This is pure organic, black, red, and yellow. Nothing else. Transparent. Pigments that instantly penetrate the skin, creating a delicate trail of pixel dust and that very soft shading that eyelids so desperately need. Working with such pigments is very easy and fast. The main thing is that they are applied to the skin quickly, which accordingly causes less trauma to such delicate skin. For eyebrows, these pigments are very preferable for melanin-rich skin, that is, in countries and regions where the skin is dark and melanin-rich, which absorbs all the warmth of the pigment. Often a good brown color heals as gray on such skin. This line is for such skin to work on eyebrows. Let's drop these pigments into water and I will talk about each of them. The lightest shade from this palette is number 1. Light yet If we are talking about eyes, then this is for finishing the blending on the upper layers in the place where our pigment should merge without a visible boundary with the skin. The red base of this pigment is clearly visible. Visually, it appears a little darker than the lightest pigments, for example, from the basic line. But still, of course, after healing, it is a very golden, delicate light shade, number 2. The pigment is the reddest of all existing brown pigments. Palette, Hanafy, if you need to significantly warm up some cold residue, it can practically play the role of a kind of corrector. Its place is in the middle of the shading, where the color is not dark, but also not light. Very warm, very red. And there is such skin even on the eyebrows. It is necessary to work with this pigment in its pure form. The third pigment is incredibly beautiful, rich, and quite dark brown. We mainly use it for shading from the eyelashes, meaning the darkest part that creates the shadow from the lashes. And when we work with this pigment on the eyebrows, it is an incredibly beautiful shade, very often used by me, and it can also be used in its pure form. Let's not forget that all these pigments are, of course, good both in their pure form and when mixed with each other, and not only with each other, but also with pigments from any other eyebrow lines. To Hanafy, everything mixes with each other. The last fourth shade, the darkest, is also based on red, meaning the amount of red is significantly higher than in the others. Dark, almost black and black, pigments for eyelids, yet it is still very rich and perfectly suitable for working with lash line enhancement. The arrow pigments are incredibly beautiful, incredibly necessary pigments. I believe that no matter which region of our planet you live in, without these pigments, your competent real work will be greatly limited. And now we will look at how they appear on cotton pads with all 4 pigments. You can see how reddish they are, how warm. I would like to remind you once again, what about the link? In the description of this video, you can find a guide on brow and eye pigments. Hanafy. There are examples of work with these pigments shown there. There is also a detailed description provided once again. Take this guide for yourself. Let it help you in your work. Another short brow line, named after the master from Spain, Julia Vasileva, and with whom we also collaborated. She also has lip pigments. There are only 3 brow pigments, logically differing from each other in lightness, from light to dark. And of course, these pigments are quite warm, as there is a lot of melanin-rich skin in Spain. And naturally, Julia was interested in having the pigments based on orange or red, which is exactly what we did. 2 pigments from this trio are orange-based, 1 is red-based. Let's see how they behave in water. These are organic pigments with a small addition of titanium dioxide. So, as you prefer, you can call them hybrid or purely organic. So let's drop these pigments into the water and see what beautiful shades are in the eyebrow line. By Julia Vasileva. This is an orange base, golden, warm, light pigment. Pigment number 2, more saturated, is also on an orange base. And the darkest one on a red base, rich, saturated, dark brown color. Heals. Not cold, natural, and very popular for dark-haired girls with quite melanin-rich skin. Actually living in Spain, just like Julia. Of course, this line is suitable not only for Spanish women. Certainly, they can be used worldwide, and they can also be mixed with eyebrow pigments from other lines. So once again, I repeat that the palette of our eyebrow pigments is absolutely limitless. And finally, the new Hanafy Colors pendants. 5 more, eyebrow pigments for you to diversify your work. This is a line called Pulse, and it was created in collaboration with the wonderful master from America, Julia Kim. What is this line for? What will it give you? It will give you even more, a greater variety of options. It will give you the opportunity not to mix. If you feel that you need to mix pigments to get a different shade, then most likely in this line, they are already mixed for you. How are they mixed? And how do they differ from other lines I mentioned earlier? Let's reason and compare. If we talk about the very first line, the basic one for eyebrows, which Hanafy started with the blue label, then this line, as we already mentioned, is based on yellow. And for example, the lines for hair stroke technique, classic part, hair strokes and pigments. For the hair stroke technique called hyperrealism, they are based on the orange, significantly warmer. As for the pulse line, it can be said that it is a middle ground, an intermediate size, with a yellow-orange base. These pigments are warmer than the main line with the blue label, but a bit more neutral, not as warm as the pigments for the hair stroke technique and hyperrealism variations, just like in the main line. From the lightest to the darkest, there are options for blondes, brunettes, and dark-haired individuals. And you can mix them with each other, of course, as well as with any other brow pigments. Hanafy. Thus, your brow palette variability increases significantly. Let's now drop these pigments into test tubes with water and see what beautiful shades we get. So let's drop into test tube number 1. How does it look in the test tube with water? It's called tea latte, or latte, whichever is correct, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. The lightest shade, a yellowish one for blondes, for girls with light hair, light eyes. By analogy, again, with our main line, the first color, the most wheat-like, the lightest. This pigment will be, it's warmer than our golden blonde, a little more neutral than the light shades from the Air Strokes line. The second number is called cappuccino. The pigment is darker. For girls with brown hair, for those with a more contrasting appearance, this pigment still belongs to the category of light shades. This pigment is neutral. The yellow-orange base here is more pronounced, as it manifests itself in its yellow component. And the calm, brown, neutral, beautiful, light shade. Number 3, the warmest in this line, is called pumpkin spice. The pigment has a distinctly orange base. As I mentioned, it's the warmest, and it will be perfect for those who have clearly gold showing in their hair and light brown or green eyes. Of course, as the warmest representative of this line, it will be suitable for mixing with darker, more neutral shades to warm them up a bit and add variety. The palette, we move on to the 4th number. A darker shade, Mocha Cafe, is called Mocha K, and the name speaks for itself. This pigment is neutral and quite rich. Brunettes? Hello, everyone. And now even brunettes with different hair colors, different eye colors and skin colors. Warming up this pigment is necessary. If you feel that this pigment might heal too cool on this skin, mix it with number 3. And finally, the 5th number, the darkest in this line, called Americano, a bitter chocolate shade for brunettes. As I already mentioned, the darkest in the palette, it is also suitable for mixing with a number. The 3rd one, if warming is needed, water type but it can also work on its own. Just don't forget that it does not have the warmth of the third number. It's a neutral shade, and you need to be a little more careful with it, as it contains, of course, the largest amount of black component. Please try the new line. Please leave your reviews and comments. We are very interested in your opinion. Consider its features. And if you lack warmth in the main line, or on the contrary, want something more neutral compared to our warm lines, use it with pleasure, and I wish you good results. Now let's talk about Hanafy mineral pigments. Our Hanafy mineral eyebrow pigment line consists of 4 brown colors and 2 correctors, a total of 6 pigments. Soft, yet rich, neutral and warm shades that integrate very well into the skin. Residues. Well, a little less than organic pigments, but very respectable for mineral pigments. The durability is also good. Most importantly, the pigments do not turn red over time, as often happened with mineral pigments of previous generations, because the composition includes iron oxides, black iron oxide, being able to oxidize. It can change its valence and turn into red iron oxide. And all the masters could see such residues from pinkish, reddish eyebrows. This is how iron oxide oxidized. Certainly, iron oxide can do this in any case, but properly balanced pigments. And some additives have led to our pigments not doing this. Or they do it so minimally that it is unnoticeable to the eye and does not spoil the appearance of the eyebrows. When you examine the compositions of these pigments, and we always honestly list all compositions on the labels, you can see that to create these pigments, some additives were used, different from what I usually mention. Usually I say that any brown color is created from a combination of 3 ingredients. These ingredients are black, red and yellow. In this case, you can see a green component, chromium oxide of green color, a mineral that is actually a neutralizer. A neutralizer, 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 a neutralizer of the future redness that comes from the oxidation of iron oxide. And also you can see at the last place a microscopic amount of yellow. An organic pigment that balances this entire structure, allows it to last longer in the skin, and in general elevates these pigments to a new level of mineral pigments of very high quality and incredibly convenient to work with. We will not be dropping these pigments into test tubes with water. Why? Because mineral pigments behave very unimpressively in water. They're large particles, which for better mixing and better penetration into the skin are shaken and mixed in a large amount of glycerin. This entire structure, this entire mixture does not allow for seeing such wonderful, beautiful, diffuse. These ones, the change of pigment in water as we see with organic pigments. Let's take a look visually at how they differ in water when you drop organic and mineral into water. Let me show you this. And after that, I will simply talk about these pigments and also show rubbings on wet cotton pads. And also somehow, how organic pigment behaves in water is well known to all of you. There are no such videos on the internet. A million. It's really very beautiful. Let me remind you, it looks like this. You can watch these beautiful swirls for a long time, and then eventually, after a few seconds, see a test tube filled with water completely colored is in the shade we need, and this helps a lot to understand what shade we are dealing with. However, such an experiment does not work with mineral pigment. This is how minerals behave in water. You see that they almost completely instantaneously, in the same second they fell to the bottom. The coloring of the water is minimal. After a few seconds it will all settle, and understanding what pigment is there becomes very difficult. So the lightest pigment in the palette of mineral pigments is called London. It is neutrally warm, very light, similar to the main Hanafy line for blondes, with light eyes and light hair. The second pigment, slightly darker, is called Amsterdam's, suitable for darker blondes for gray eyes. Such a neutral, cool pigment. All these pigments appear warmer on swatches than the basic main Hanafy line, precisely because that's how minerals behave, and minerals always look more reddish. However, they heal into very neutral, pleasant colors, analogous to number 3 with milk chocolate from the main line. The pigment called milk is just as warm as milk chocolate, meaning for brunettes, for those who already have eyes with melanin brown, such warm eyes. And this is such a pigment. And the darkest of this quartet, the pigment under the name Bangkok, heals approximately like the quartet from the main line, a fairly rich color, pleasant, yet not cold. This is such a range of brown shades. Additionally, 2 correctors are included with it. As you can see, similar to our main correctors, they are also kind of reddish, orange, and yellow. However, because these are minerals and not organic, the colors of mineral dyes are different. They're more pastel, softer, with no fiery orange, no orange shades here. Rather, it's a pigment called Cairo, a brick-like terracotta, and a pigment called Dubai resembles mustard. Very soft correctors, which can sometimes be used in their pure form. They are not reddish, not a very striking shade. The rules for using these correctors are the same as for all others, either as a base, under the main color, or on their own. In some cases, either mix into the cap with the main pigment. Now I will also show them to you on a cotton pad. These are our minerals. Please welcome them warmly, convenient to work with. Naturally, as usual, they can be mixed with each other. Moreover, they are perfectly suitable for mixing with other lines, even though they are organic or hybrid. And on this wonderful, pleasant note, after discussing that everything can indeed be mixed, I would like to announce to you a new line that hasn't been released yet, but I would like you to eagerly anticipate it. A line that was born precisely when we realized that our mineral pigments, when mixed with the pigments from our organic lines, yield excellent results. Wonderful shades and excellent results on the skin. Therefore, the decision was made to create a true line of hybrid pigments, where the ratio of organic to mineral will be approximately half and half. It has already been developed. Stay tuned. When it goes on sale, you will be pleasantly surprised. A huge number of artists working in this technique were eagerly awaiting our new product, eagerly waiting for the pigments for microblading to finally hit the market, to go on sale, to become available. We have been preparing them for a very long time. The preparation and testing took a lot of time because there are many features, many distinct nuances here. Different, not like those used by artists. Ordinary pigments for permanent makeup, so it took quite a significant amount of time. But now they are ready, we present them to you. So what are they? Our pigments for microblading? These are mineral pigments. They are essentially made based on our mineral pigments, meaning the palette, the main combinations of shades, ingredients, and implement the range of shades. It replicates our mineral pigments with the only difference being that here one shade, brown, is added, and conversely one corrector is excluded, which I want to mention right away about these pigments compared to mineral ones. Well, first of all, of course, these pigments are much thicker as pigments for microblading should be. In fact, they contain no water at all. They are entirely glycerin-based, a very creamy, even paste-like substance, so that with the appropriate tools, it can be applied to the skin properly without spreading. The second difference from mineral pigments is that they are much warmer. Again, this is related to the specifics of the microblading technique, since the cuts that the artist makes on the skin cause the pigment to penetrate a little deeper, and accordingly, the same shade may heal a bit cooler. We have already discussed this issue in comparison with the technique of powder brows, shading, and hair stroke technique, machine hair stroke technique. The same applies, the line is denser, the pigment insertion might be slightly deeper, and accordingly, the same pigment, the same color may heal a bit cooler. It's the same situation here. Here, it's an incision in the skin, not a perforation with a working needle. Therefore, it's very important to maintain the warmth of the shade. Therefore, these pigments with a very similar composition are warmer. That is, the warm component with a skillful combination of yellow and red shades is enhanced here to ensure the pigment is warm. However, since these are mineral pigments, which, as we know, over time can oxidize their black iron oxide, turning it into red iron oxide, and many mineral pigments over time shift to red and even crimson shades. And this was a flaw of many previous generations of pigments for microblading. So, in order to eliminate this possibility in our pigments, just like in regular mineral ones, green chromium oxide is added, which balances this future redness. This pigment, like all other minerals, is quite pastel, not bright. It cannot make the pigment green, of course. It is intended for the correct color balance and works for the future. Well, as you can see, there are 6 numbers here. I repeat once again that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are brown shades from the lightest to the darkest. And the 6th number is a corrector similar to Cairo in mineral pigments. That is a terracotta reddish color. It is always needed. In our profession, there are also pigments, well, from other brands, previous, let's say, generations, which, wanting to avoid this very unpleasant situation with the remains of raspberry microblading, we have all met them. And they often come to us for the removal procedure. It's very unattractive, a very unpleasant situation. To avoid it, many companies stopped making microblading pigments mineral-based and started making them hybrid or even completely organic. But in this case, with this technique, this is, of course, completely unjustified, because here you can't avoid shifting to gray, steel, and even bluish shades. Organics and microblading, in my opinion, are poorly compatible. That is why, when creating our microblading pigments, we decided that they would be mineral-based. But taking into account all the features of these pigments, I hope you will enjoy working with them, with these new products of ours. So, I think I have thoroughly and comprehensively covered the issue of our pigments for eyebrows and eyelids. I think the guide, which is linked in the description of this video, will help you constantly remember what I talked about, so that this information settles better in your minds, serving as a hint or cheat sheet during your work. So thank you all for your attention. I am convinced that this video was useful to you. Moreover, it will continuously assist you in the future during your work. And don't forget to send your wonderful works to our Telegram chat dedicated to Hanafy Colors Pigments. You will find all the links in the description of this video. I wish you all good clients, beautiful, successful works, and see you next time.